with gratitude, the land that we stand on, the land of the Algonquin-speaking Lenni Lenape peoples, original inhabitants, and all of our ancestors. And our guest speaker tonight is Claire Garland, and she's got some wonderful information for us, slides and clips. She is actually the co-chair of the Native American History and Life of the New Jersey Historical Commission. And with that, I will turn our program over to Claire Garland tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us tonight. And I'd like to introduce you to my other co-chair, Jimmy Sweet, who is professor at Rutgers University. And he provided a lecture a few months ago on property and sovereignty of native lands. So I asked Patty if she could pull out a clip for us that dealt with environmental racism to start off as our introduction, which is a few minutes, and then I'll come back on and lead the discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to bring it up. Give me just a couple of seconds.
Now in part 3, I will go into the ongoing fights over Native American land and sovereignty. This situation is not a thing of the past for Native Americans. They continue to fight against continued theft and destruction of their lands and continue to fight to strengthen tribal sovereignty. There are many ways that Native American land and sovereignty are still endangered and under attack. I will now highlight 2 modern examples, but keep in mind there are many others. First, we will look at environmental devastation. Numerous industries look to Native American lands as dumping grounds or prime lands for exploitation. Such industries often use native lands because they can get around state laws prohibiting the dumping of toxic materials. The federal government then approves various mining and other environmentally destructive activities on Native American lands and has done so for decades. From the dumping of toxic waste, pollution of water, and the building of dangerous oil pipelines, many Native American lands have been rendered unusable for residential or agricultural purposes. Many of the dams built in the 20th century were built in a place so that they would primarily flood Native American lands. Some native lands were used for bombing ranges and nuclear test sites. Closer to home, the Ramapo Lenape Nation of northern New Jersey have seen some of their ancestral lands become an Environmental Protection Agency Superfund site because of years of dumping of toxic paint sludge by the Ford Motor Company. This dumping has caused the deaths of tribal members and is an ongoing health hazard. At the same time, the Ramapo and their allies successfully fought off the Pilgrim oil pipeline that was planned to go through their ancestral lands. Native Americans continue to fight against environmental devastation of their lands and American land more broadly. One of the most visible protests was the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in North Dakota in 2016 and 2017. Oil pipelines threatened the primary water source of the Standing Rock Reservation, and the protests attracted Native Americans and their allies from all over the country. However, the pushback by various police forces resulted in 6 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and hundreds more arrests of activists trying to protect Native American lands and water. Native American protest continues, but rarely do their protests receive national attention like their protests did at Standing Rock. I want to reiterate that tribes are sovereign nations. They have their own political systems, governments, constitutions, and court systems. However, the legal jurisdiction of tribes has been muddied by various laws, which serves to limit the sovereignty of tribal nations to prosecute crimes. In 1885, Congress enacted the Major Crimes Act, which took jurisdiction away from tribes for major crimes and put that jurisdiction in the federal government to prosecute those crimes. Major crimes include murder, attempted murder, rape, arson, burglary, and a few others. Another law in 1953, Public Law 280, put jurisdiction for most crimes into the hands of state governments, but only about a dozen states have this jurisdiction. This has created a patchwork of legal jurisdictions on tribal lands. When a crime is committed, the tribe, state, or federal government might have jurisdiction depending on the crime or what state the tribe is in. Tribes have limited jurisdiction depending on whether the crime happened on or off reservation, the perpetrator was a member of the tribe or not, or who the crime was committed against. This often creates massive confusion of jurisdiction and causes many crimes to fall through the cracks. Additionally, because the federal government often has limited resources on rural tribal lands, many crimes the federal government is responsible for go unpunished. This murky jurisdictional situation limits the sovereignty of tribal governments, whose courts are often prohibited from prosecuting crimes against their people. We're coming to the end of this lecture, and I want to reiterate several points. The United States exists only because it upholds racist concepts like the doctrine of discovery and through the theft of Native American land over the past 250 years. This does not erase the fact that Native Americans still exist as sovereign nations, and that the U.S. has treaty obligations to many of those tribes as guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. Finally, there are 3 tribes still in New Jersey, recognized by the state, that still hold sovereignty and continue to fight the destruction and loss of their lands. Most Americans view the founding of the United States with an uncritical eye, but we must understand that for Native Americans, the foundation of the United States has had tremendous costs. The theft of their land, murder of their people, and attacks on their cultures and tribal sovereignty has done irreparable harm to Native American nations. But Native Americans have always resisted. They have persevered and are still here. We can both celebrate the founding of the United States while also fighting to protect and restore Native American lands. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Patty. And to add to the subject, I found a book on environmental racism, and I wanted to share my notes with you. So if Patty can pull up the PowerPoint, I'll get started.
Here it comes. Give me a second. Just a quick reminder, anyone who's not muted, please remember to mute your device unless we're speaking. We'll have lots of time later for questions and comments.
Thanks. And at the end, if I still have some time left, I wanted to give you an update on the Ford Motor Company situation from our meeting last week. This book, The Assault of the American Mind, is by Harriet Washington. Next. It discusses environmental racism and the assault on the American mind. Harriet is an author and a medical researcher. Her work included the effects of different toxics and poisons on our population.
Claire, tell me what screen is showing right now? I'm trying to get my computer to cooperate.
I'm on the second slide with the picture of the author.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Harriet.
No.
Okay, good.
Oh no, I'm
No, nothing.
title slide.
Okay, because what's showing on my screen, oh, I'm sorry. For some reason it paused.
Yeah,
Why
there's
is it-
not anything. Nothing's showing.
I'm gonna resume. Okay,
Okay.
All right, if you can go to number 2.
Good.
Okay, And there you see a picture of Harriet Washington, who was a medical researcher. Slide 3.
Okay. I'm trying to get it to take the full screen, but this is the best I can do right now. I apologize. You can see this quote?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you X out? Can you X out over here, or will that take it off your screen?
Let me try that. I'm trying to do the slideshow
Yeah.
version.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Okay.
And in her book, she had this quote from Chief Seattle, which I thought was worth adding to the discussion. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. Slide 4 is well, I have a picture of the power plant. It was in the paper, New York Times last week,
And
showing.
this did not come through on what you sent me, so I don't have that.
Okay. Next slide. These notes were taken from the book and cover the prism of race, the truth about IQ, the brain thieves, the lead age of heavy metals, environmental neurotoxins, prenatal effects on the developing brain. Next. Microbes that sap intelligence, saving communities, and preserving brain power. Next. The effects on marginalized communities that are near toxic waste include insufficient sanitation services, lead poisoning, atmospheric pollution, infectious diseases, industrial wastes, environmental hazards, and the effects that those things have on cognitive minds, the damages that it causes. Next. I have a picture of, this was in the New York Times also, with the caption, President Biden seeks regulation to rein in tailpipe pollution and will hasten the nation's transition to electric vehicles. So all of this is going into the environment and into the air that we're breathing. Next. The nutritional deficiencies, diseases, was one of her studies. And it included the study on iodine that was added to water in 1924, raised IQ points in that community by 15 points, and also improved thyroid health. Communities with high deficiencies of iodine included African Americans, Mexican Americans, non-Hispanic whites, and there was no data for Native Americans many times because it's hard to separate them out from other communities of color. The studies include findings of lead, poisonous metals, arsenic, mercury poison on reservation lands. Next. One of her topics was Love Canal and the impact that the chemicals had on this community, which was majority of white people around Niagara Falls. The EPA managed to move them out of the area. The environmental poisoning caused a loss of intelligence and behavioral problems that destroyed lives. It included finding PBCs, BPAs, lactates, hydrocarbons that blighted the communities. I think we all have heard of DDT and the damage it does to birds, the bird eggs. Butterflies are rare around the area. Pesticides that poison the soil. The runoff poisons the fish and then our gardens. The chemical exposure reduces intelligence and brain function. And the author calls them brain drainers. Next. She mentions fence line communities. Fence line, and even in Chief Mann's report the other day, he mentioned they were going to move the fence line. So a fence line is where they keep people of color on one side of the poison and try to fence it off from the white communities. Now they've had to move that in Ringwood and Mawa because the runoff has now started affecting the white communities and getting in the white water supply. So now the state has decided to go back and try to deal with the problem. These Superfund waste sites, it seems as though if we had a map of North America, you could put your finger anywhere you want it on the map and do a little research on Google, and you would find a site that was poisonous to the communities of people living in that area. Many times schools were built on landfills that leached dangerous chemicals into the water supply and affected the children who were sitting on that all day long. In South Camden, in New Jersey, the schools are located along heavy industries, and her research showed that 2/3 of the children had asthma. Next. Pathogens diminish intelligence, hamper brain development. The government calls these sacrifice zones. Communities of color are sacrificed. Somebody has to live there, so it might as well be them, where they are assaulted by environmental poisons and other hazards. By eliminating lead, mercury, hydrocarbon, industrial chemicals, rental exposure to alcohol, red tide, algae poisoning, worm infestation, and trichinosis were all found in these so-called sacrifice zones. Next. This was a chart that she included in one of her chapters, and it just shows the cause and effect of so many things that affect communities that are subjected to these hazards. And you see exposure to household tanks, and then you see the economic marginalization, the climate of violence causing anxiety, depression, the substandard housing that people are forced to live in, affects cultural practices. Communities have high asthma and low birth weight, also behavioral disorders, high levels of learning disabilities. And then these physical problems add to a sedentary lifestyle, which causes obesity, diabetes, and cardiac diseases. Next. And this economic marginalization, again, causes a climate of violence, anxiety, depression, substandard housing. Next. Exposure to asthma and sedentary lifestyle. Next. This is just kind of repeating what the chart had to say. Next. Environmental toxicity erodes intelligence and affects behavior. The IQ gap in the United States lags behind Western societies with fewer resources than we have. The United States was ranked on a level with Poland and Estonia. The top scores in IQ were found in Japan, Scandinavian nations, and Australia. Japan has a high diet of fish, which has high salt and iodine, which affects the brains in a positive manner. Next. And some of the pollution that's caused in our environment, the open drainage and open sewers opened into the ocean, opened into the rivers. There was a big hullabaloo years ago for the polluting that was going into the Navasink River until different groups attacked that and tried to put a limit on it and end it because it was killing all the living creatures in the river, smothering them. Next. From her chapter on the brain thieves, she talks about the 1924 Standard Oil problem in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where 300 workers were poisoned from lead and gas. So many of the workers were ending up in the hospital. They called in the EPA to find out what was happening. They ended lead additives into gasoline in 1974. And in 1978, lead was banned in paint. And we learned that lead poisoning harms bodily organs, causes hearing loss, headaches, weakness of muscles, memory loss, and the ability to think clearly. Next. It causes angry, moody, hyperactive behavior in children and adults and affects personality. It causes heart disease and high levels of colorectal cancer. Not sure I said that correct. Causes a mind-destroying consequences of lead exposure, causes aggressive and criminal behavior. Also, high rates of ADHD, of poor conduct, and autism. In the Baltimore public schools, a study showed that 56% of the students graduated in this particular year of the study. This book was published in 2019, so some of the statistics might need to be updated. Next. Another study was from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. And here the study showed violent crime and bullying and high levels of shoplifting and vandalism. Next. In Flint, Michigan in 2014, the study showed weight loss, stomach pain, gastrointestinal distress, fatigue, lack of energy, confusion, irritableness, the not able to complete tasks and not able to sleep. And that's not that long ago. Also, next, kidney cancer. One person moved there to be with his family, developed kidney cancer, and was dead 1 year later after moving to Flint. Flint's community is made up of 65% African American and Latino, and 42% of those of the community was considered poor. You remember Flint was switching the water from the lake into the river, taking the water from the river, which was polluted, and then sending it through the lead pipes and then into people's homes without them knowing about it. I think they're in the process of replacing all the pipes now. She also does a comparison of wealth. And if you compare white wealth, for every dollar that a white person has, an Asian has 83 cents, Hispanic has 7 cents, and the African American has 6 cents. Next. The Native American community, I have information that I'm going to share just a little bit below this. Next. Another study from Detroit in 2015 showed a drop in IQ of 5 points, students slower to learn, lacking in ability to read and calculate, learning disabilities, hearing loss, balance disorders, hyperactivity, perceptual disorders, attention deficit disorders, and a reduction in reasoning skills. The students were less able to compete or hold employment and were more likely to be unemployed. Next. Native American communities were researched to find poisoned water supplies and radioactivity in many of the communities. In New Mexico, the uranium mines had contaminated the water of the Navajo. The US cities that had aging water delivery systems with lead pipes also led to contamination and injury to people. Water resources were befouled by raw and treated sewage, industrial chemicals, animal offal, excrement, and for pharmaceuticals. And just one thing about water sources. One of the stories about Abraham Lincoln's time in the White House was about the water that was coming into the White House, which was pumped in from the river. The river at the time was the sewer, and everybody dumped everything in the river. So whatever poisons and bacteria and germs and viruses and excrement and all the rest of it ended up coming out of the pipes in the White House. 2 of their children died while they were in the White House. And it's been traced back that they think that part of that was caused by the foul water, which no one realized at the time, but now they do. Next. Also, Alzheimer's have been linked to carbon in the air, magnetic and iron oxide, and rust. Dementia, a silent epidemic, has occurred in people of color in color communities. She also researches what she calls petrochemical corridors, kind of like our highway system here in New Jersey Turnpike, Garden State Parkway, releasing 3.9 billion pounds of toxic chemicals into the air, and then the higher incidence of cancer along those routes, wherever that heavy pollution is. Industries have dumped 21.8 billion pounds of industrial waste into the water of African American, Hispanic, and Native American communities. Next. City of Anniston was another one of the studies which sued companies, and they hired Johnny Cochran, who was the lawyer for O.J. Simpson. He also handled the case up at Mawa for the Ramapo people. They were able to get a settlement of $142 million. The homeowners were paid about $9,000 each, but the properties were still unsellable and the people were still trapped in their homes. There were very few cleanups and the people still were suffering with the health issues. Next. And the same thing with Mawa. Another study was called Prenatal Peril. The quality of nutrition is related to intelligence, especially in the early months of development, of the brain development, which occurs very early in the fetus, even before birth. In these areas of urban food swamps, in other words, not enough food stores, not enough proper nutrition, not enough fresh fruits and vegetables, and what is there many times is unaffordable. People without automobiles who can't go out of town and get foods from a ShopRite or a Food Town or a nearby supermarket, many times are trapped into an area in a community where the food is just deficient. And the food that they eat many times is just deficient in amino acids, iodine, calcium, iron, phosphorus, and folic acid. Dietary supplements that are given to mothers are there to protect the infant brain. And most of us who have had children remember those days of taking all those big vitamins that you were expected to take. Next. Unborn children of color are awash in environmental hazards. Prenatal supplements reduce birth defects and eliminate spina bifida. She also talks about cleaning around the house with baking soda, vinegar, being attentive to non-toxic commercial products during pregnancy, because those toxics can affect the developing brain of the child before the child is even born. In communities of color, 76% of the billboards advertised alcohol and tobacco. Tobacco has been banned, but you'll still see alcohol. The same billboards, research showed only 20% were found in white communities. Next. Next. Polluters, when they're confronted by different organizations or the EPA, use denialism, claim that there's no such thing, there's no evidence, it's insufficient. They blame the victim instead of themselves. Corporations choose profitability over cleanup. They choose to sacrifice some lives while preserving others. The health and minds of millions of people are at stake to corporations. And of course, many of them can wall themselves off into gated communities and very wealthy areas where nothing runs uphill, it all runs downhill in the communities of people of color. Next. Tobacco billboards are now banned, and thank goodness, won't see any. And the author also listed several organizations that people could get information from and find information. I mean, this area of environmental racism is vast, and I just tried to give you an introduction of some of her research. Next. The call for stronger environmental and energy laws, which the administration seems to be doing now. Efforts to reduce pollution, fossil fuel dependence, to protect waterways and wildlife, to keep the air clean and water clean, and provide for a clean energy future. Next. And some of the new generation of people of color she lists were Aaron Mayer, who was first African-American director of the Sierra Club, Marsha Coleman Adebayo, a senior policy analyst for the EPA, and Mustafa Ali, who is co-founder of an EPA environmental justice program. And of course, there are hundreds of people involved in environmental activity, just to give you some. And the last slide is of a highway in Vermont, just so we can remember what a good, clean environment looks like and what we all need to strive for. And I wanted to give you just a brief update on our meeting last week with the American Indian Commission meeting. Chief Mann gave a short talk about the Superfund site and where they were. As you know, they are being sued by the state of New Jersey. The EPA has 6 law firms working on this, and they're seeking resettlement for the families in Ringwood. Apparently, there was a suit that was settled about a decade ago for a small amount, but the problem is still there. The settlements did not include health benefits, so people there are still having tremendous health problems. Come to find out, that settlement occurred in a year when Ford had made record profits. But over this last 10 years, people continue to die, and especially of cancer. The entire region now is infected because water has now spread to white communities, and toxic was dumped in the river. The EPA will not pay for the relocation of the community. They did meet with Congressman Pallone, who helped remove some of the red tape dealing with the state for applying for funding, and they apparently have another lawsuit going. So it's not just the one with the state, but there's another one. They've moved the fence line. I guess once the EPA came in, they complained of burning eyes and burning throats. So that's people from the state. The contractor that was hired dug up the paint sludge, and it was noted that they were not wearing protective gear or protecting their boots or anything. They loaded it on trucks and moved it to the next town. One of the people from the community followed the trucks and found out that they dumped it in the next town. So now another town has the problem of Ford's paint sludge in their neighborhood.
Claire,
yeah.
could I just ask you, this began in 1967, correct? With the Ford
well,
Motor Company and
I
this
think
land?
so. Yes, I'm not exactly sure of the date, but it's been decades.
It's incredible. I
Right.
mean, it's gone on for years and years and years.
Right. And the last point I'll make is they brought up the fact that Love Canal, where they dumped 43,000 tons into the canal of sludge, the EPA moved the whole community out of there at Niagara Falls. So that's just a brief introduction to the topic of environmental racism, and I hope that it added to your understanding. I really didn't understand the amount of damage that it did to brains, to children's brains, and people in general, and community. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. What a wealth of information and knowledge. And like you, I really had no idea of the impact. I knew a little bit of it, but you know, the pervasive impact of these toxins and this whole situation, which has been going on for many years. And thank you so much. I hope that, you know, everybody has gotten information from that.
Okay.
Linda, are we opening up for questions, or does Patty have something else?
Does anybody have any questions? Anything to add?
You
Now
can
is the time to unmute.
I have nothing else to screen share, but
okay.
I did want to say that mention that anyone who would really like to get a deeper, more detailed history can watch an HBO documentary. I'll put it in the chat. It's called Man v. Ford. So Man refers to Wayne Mann, who I suppose is related to Chief Vincent Mann, M-A-N-N, and Ford, of course, is the Ford Motor Company. And it gives you a rather grim history with a lot of details, including the suit that was brought against Ford. The documentary was actually made in 2011. One of the things that we learned is that when Ford did their half-baked cleanup, it was totally inadequate. There's still an amazing amount of toxins still in the ground, very close to the Wanakee Reservoir, which supplies water to 2 million people in North Jersey. And so the site has been put back on the Superfund list for cleanup, which is apparently the very first time a site has been taken off and then put back on.
For more about what's happening in the Mahwah area, NPR actually did something on it the end of June. If you look at their YouTube, you can hear Chief Mann talking about it. But I mean, we're honing in on Ford and what's happening in New Jersey. But the truth is, American businesses have been polluting lands, especially indigenous, especially people of color, across the world. When we haven't been able to dump it in the US, we've gone to other countries. One of my sons, in fact, right now is in South America, but he lived in Colombia and Peru. And in Colombia, there's a lot of mining done. So in the areas of people of color, the darker the skin, the more mining is done in that area. So it isn't just the Ford Motor Company. It's many, many, many big businesses that have, you know, we seem to talk about, oh, years ago, things were so good. Well, this has been going on since the beginning of time in our country. It's not new. It's, you know, it hasn't, the good thing is there's a little more discussion about it now, and people are realizing some of what is going on. But as long as, you know, we continue to produce these toxic materials, we need to dump them somewhere. So better in an area of color than in, you know, an area of white people. And that's pretty much been the thinking for many, 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 many decades.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what do we do about this? How do we move forward? I'm reading a book right now. It's great. I recommend it to all women. It's by the First Lady of Iceland. Her husband's the president, and it's called Secrets of the Spraker, I think is how you say it. And in Iceland, I know it's a small country, but they revolve around the family unit. And they, you know, have wonderful things like healthcare for everyone, and they have childcare for everyone, and they give paternity leave for 3 months. And the government does this, whereas our government, we don't have these things. So perhaps, you know, we should learn a little bit about how some countries are doing things as opposed to the way the US has done things. Dumping hazardous materials has been going on, as I said, forever. So how do we make a change?
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
Yes, my name is Ari Jan. I'm a colleague of Patty at the Monmouth Center for World Religions. I was at New Jersey Institute of Technology as a faculty member. And at that time, this was about 10 years ago, we did a study in northern New Jersey, and it was, participants were from the Hackensack University Medical Center, the medical doctors there, the Meadowlands Environmental Research Institute in Lindenhurst, and myself from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And the title of the paper that was published was Mapping Contaminants Associated with Autism, a public health pilot in New Jersey. And we found a strong relationship in autism with the contamination.
Yeah.
The higher the contamination level, more occurrence of autism in
Right.
children.
Yeah.
So I think there is There are a lot of problems in New Jersey that were uncovered by this study.
Right.
I believe that Christine actually had a question before, did you? Christine
Yes,
Banaco?
I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, your name isn't showing, the librarian. Is it Linda?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Everybody else's name is up there, but yours
I'm
just says
sorry.
Red Bank Public Library, so I don't know. You recommended a book by the First Lady of Iceland, and I wondered if you could spell that word that was difficult to
Yeah, I can put it in the chat too. It's called,
Okay, thank
Secret-
you.
and there's actually a word in Iceland for that means extraordinary women. That shows you right there. That's a great
Thank you.
thing. But yeah, it talks a lot about women and how, I mean, the attitude in Iceland is they want everyone to be part of the workforce. So they, encourage women to work. I mean, it's not a perfect society for sure. But the things that they honor in Iceland are very different from what we honor in America, quite frankly. But I highly recommend it.
Thank you. And
Sure.
the place where the Ford Motor Company is dumping all of this, did somebody say Mawa?
Yes.
That's where it's happening?
Mhm.
Thank you.
The plant, my understanding is that the auto plant was
in-
located in Mawa. They were generating 6,000 gallons a day of paint sludge. And so I believe the dumping occurred from 1967 till the early 1970s. It's not currently going on. And so they dumped all of that sludge into the mines. There were iron mines that were created in the 1700s. So that land Ford bought, and they dumped all this just right into the mines or on the land, along with many other bits of garbage and toxins. The problem is when they did their cleanup in 1994, they took some of the stuff off the surface and then they just capped the mines. It means most of it is still in there. It has seeped into the groundwater, and it's very close to contaminating irretrievably the reservoir.
Mhm.
So then Chief Mann is representing the Ramapo Nation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you, everyone.
Claire, wasn't there new dumping though recently?
I don't think it was new dumping. I think it was just the residue of what
The old
was,
dumping?
what was there, and then the runoff now, and not getting all of it out of there
Mhm.
is what they've been suffering with.
Well, and this land was used, I mean, to grow crops, not just drinking the water, growing crops. Everything was being done as far as growing their own food, and all of it was polluted
Right,
because of the dumping. So it affected everyone living on the land.
right. And the animals too.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Claire. I thought this was very, very interesting. So it was very
Thank you.
informative. So thank you for sharing this.
Thanks.
Is that book in the library, the one that Iceland, the First Lady wrote?
Yes, I have it right now, but I'm bringing it back in a couple of days. And we're in a consortium, so you can always order an item from us. If we don't have it, we'll do everything we can to get it for you. And also Patty put in the chat the 2011 HBO documentary, Man versus Ford, in there as well.
So Linda, you're in the Monmouth County Library System?
No, we're not.
You're
We're
not? Okay.
Red Bank is in, actually it's called LMX. It's Libraries of Middlesex County. But we have access to you know, the same materials as Monmouth County does.
Okay.
I see Diane has her hand up.
I just wanted to
Yes.
comment, I just wanted to comment on the excellent presentation and Miss Claire saying she didn't realize the severity of the neurotoxicity of the lead. And I just wanted to comment that the lead, you know, not only in Flint and Newark and in the pipes, but then in Merce, I used to be a nursing director in Plainfield, and the most inner cities and the public health departments, they have something called a prevention program where they recognized years ago children were eating these paint chips of lead paint that had lead in the paint and having significant, you know, negative neuro responses. So that we can't underscore enough how damaging lead ingestion is to the brain, in the embryologic formation, or even for children and adults, but primarily for pediatrics. And when the brain is developing, lead can be a very, very serious negative, causing negative situations to arise in terms of cognition and capability. That's all.
Yeah.
Very true. Thank you, Reverend Diane. Thank you. Anyone else?
I
I
have
see.
another, I have another question, but I don't want to ask if somebody else has one first because I've already.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christine. Yes. Mhm.
Ms. Garland, you referred to the American Indian Commission. Is that a New Jersey-wide commission? Can you talk more about what that is?
Yes, it's State of New Jersey, Commission on American Indian Affairs. And there are 3 state recognized tribes in New Jersey, the Ramapo, the Nanacoke, and the Powhatan. And then there are inter-tribal groups recognized. I serve on the commission as a resource person. I'm not a commissioner, but I represent the Sandhill Indian people here in Monmouth County. And so I participate in whatever's going on.
So the Delaware then are not listed as one of New Jersey's tribes, nations?
Well, the Delaware, there are different groups located in different areas. And I think there is a group in Delaware, actually, that's related to the Nanacoke. So they seem to be cousins, and they seem to be related. Might have a different title, but they're basically related. And then there are a number of, you know, there's a Delaware tribe that moved out to Oklahoma. And, you know, there are different groups that left the eastern seaboard and moved to the western states, different places, Wisconsin and Oklahoma, and just different reservations. But there are just a remnant of people still here. And so they try to be part of the community of New Jersey.
And does the commission put out press releases, or is there a way to follow their activities?
Yes, there's a website. If you go on newjersey.gov and you go under Secretary of State, you'll see different commissions there under the Secretary of State, Office of Secretary of State. And then American Indian Commission is one of those. If you click on that, you'll go into the website and you'll see updates and meetings and whatever else is going on at the time.
Thank you very much.
I mean, keep in mind, I wouldn't have known about this if it wasn't for Claire Garland telling me what was going on with Chief Mann. We had talked to him in, I guess, February about doing a program about environmental racism, but you know, then it was picked up by NPR and some major television stations apparently. But most of the time you don't hear any of this until many people die. And that's usually when you hear of it. I mean, Claire, do you think that voices are being heard more about what's happening on Indigenous lands across the country? We're focusing on Jersey.
I think there's more awareness now, and the press seems to be more actively involved in reporting.
Mhm.
And Bureau of Indian Affairs now has an American Indian director, secretary.
Right.
And I just think there's just more available and more knowledge that is and there are different sites, there are different websites that people are able to post things and keep people informed. And I think it's just more aware now. People are more aware of what's going on.
Which is a good
Very
thing.
good.
I
Thank
see
you so
that-
much.
I see that Claire Phelps put in the chat, why hasn't there been more TV coverage on this topic? And I 100% agree. The New Jersey NJ12 had a tiny little blurb recently and then over. Almost everybody has heard of Love Canal, but on the documentary, the HBO documentary, the doctor, the consultant doctor for this community said what's happening in the Ringwood community, that's the neighborhood up near Mawa, is as bad or worse than Love Canal. The cluster of cancer and multiple chronic horrible diseases has no comparison elsewhere in the country.
Mm.
It's really horrifying. But what I would like to ask Claire Garland is, what can we send people home with in terms of action items, things they can do to help?
Well, I joined the Clean Ocean and Clean Ocean Action group that's around here.
Mm.
And I participated in something back in the spring. And I think there's a clean water and clean air group, clean food or something like that around here, which I contribute to. And they do have a newsletter. I think maybe look locally and see what's available. And the book had several sites that were available for people to participate in, different organized groups, environmental justice and different things. And if you Google environmental justice, you'll find a wealth of information on, if you click on the images, it'll give you a wealth of information about different groups that are actively involved in the environment.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that someone, excuse me, Wandra Harmson put in the chat the 2019 film Dark Water. Dark Waters is very good. It's a true story which deals with the actions taken against the DuPont Corporation for polluted drinking water. That was here in the United States. It starred Mark Ruffalo, I believe. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that. That movie.
Good, I'll look for it.
Dark Water. Dark Waters.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
I just looked it up while we were talking, that the EPA also moved the town of Times Beach, Missouri in 1984 because of dioxin contamination. The entire town was moved, and the original town is now a ghost town. So there are precedents for towns to be moved away from the toxins.
Right.
And I would hope that the that the commission has lawyers that can pull all these examples up to say,
Yeah, this is the Attorney General's office that's handling this.
But precedent has been set.
What was the name of that town, Christine?
Times Beach, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
I just Googled Missouri toxic towns and toxic town and it came up.
Wow.
Well, here's the thing, and Claire, maybe you can shed some light on this. I know that they relocated the people in Love Canal as well.
Mhm.
But the folks in Ringwood have inhabited this land for centuries, and I get the impression they want to stay. This is their ancestral homeland.
Probably.
Mm,
It's hard to leave your home. Now, where are you going? In New Jersey, and not too many
Mhm.
places to go to that are affordable. And part of the problem is that their lands cross over into New York. So you're dealing with a boundary line that goes through their reservation. And one side is New Jersey and the other side is New York. So you're dealing with two governments, two EPAs, two law for, two agencies, two of everything, because each one is blaming the other for not getting it cleaned up. And so it makes it even harder to try to resolve the issue. And it's just going to take a massive cleanup if they can ever get it done.
mhm.
And if there are any left and they all haven't died out by then.
And that's the other thing they mentioned in the documentary is the lack of old people. So many of the community don't live past the age of 65.
Yeah,
They have a shortage of elders.
right.
And I see Wander also put in the chat a resource, the Baha'i, she's one of my Baha'i friends from Massachusetts, Baha'i Inspired International Environment Forum. I don't know much about it, but I also, there's a local group, I don't know if anyone's heard of Water Spirit, which I guess is out of Rumson. The website says it's a center of ecology and spirituality that informs, inspires, and enables all people to deepen their consciousness of the sacredness and interdependence of all creation, with a focus on water. Does anybody know anything about this group?
First I've heard of it.
I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about it.
Well, I can't tell you anything except I've heard the name and I'm on the website. So,
Also, Wanda said that on Cape Cod, they're fighting the dumping of nuclear waste into Cape Cod Bay and the destruction of virgin forests to build solar panels arrays. We've always talked about the oil, how much we need the oil, but the truth is we can live without oil. We can't live without water. All communities need water to survive.
Right.
And as you can see, I mean, the water is contaminated on lands across the country, but particularly in, areas of color, and certainly tonight's focus, Indigenous lands. Once the water's polluted and people can't live,
Right.
and people can't just sell their homes, especially once, it's known that their homes are on toxic dumps. They can't sell them and move elsewhere.
Right.
So
Nobody's going to buy it.
no.
Where is that city of Anniston that was referred to in the book?
I think that was in Alabama. So she picked cities across the country, and it just proved that you could put your finger anywhere on the map and find a terrible problem anywhere.
Well, again, we try to always leave these programs with a little bit of hope. Claire, can you give us any kind of hope at all? This has been
Well,
especially discouraging.
I think I just heard something today where the Senate had come to an agreement about something. And
Oh.
they're hoping that they can move some legislation that will affect climate and cleanup and EPA. And so there's hope, inch by inch, there's hope.
Yes, thank you so much, Claire. I think, once again, I guess, voting and, making yourself aware of all of the issues. I just want to backtrack a little because Sue Goldberg had put in the chat that the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, unfortunately has now given the power back to the states rather than the sovereign tribal nations when that point was made. So, that's something to take into consideration because, in terms of allocating money to get things cleaned up and all of the issues surrounding that.
Right.
So I think just the awareness now that we have and, the information that's out there, that's hope in itself.
And I would say join a local group.
Right.
Local groups around here.
And Sue Goldberg put in the chat tribalcleanwater.org. So if you want to look in the chat, you can get that as well. Anything else? Anyone?
One more comment in the chat from Rich Devlin. The summer issue of the feminist journal, The Drift, has an article, Audacity of Nature Docs, What Barack Obama's Great National Parks Leaves Out by Chanel Adams, which is on Netflix. He says it describes how many of our national parks were taken from Indigenous people, and it's quite eye-opening. So that's another piece of information to go to.
Okay.
Okay, well, I would thank you, everyone.
You have to remember that the federal government has 500 million acres. So
Okay. Wow.
that's a lot of took it all. They took it all. 500
Wow.
million acres.
Wow.
That they took. Well, that's an eye opener in itself.
Sure.
Okay.
Excuse me, Linda, do we want to say anything about next month's program?
Well, next month we're trying to do a program on healthcare inadequacies. I'm definitely not saying that word right, but it's still being put together. So hopefully we will be having it on our healthcare situation in the country. And again, after 7 years, many of these programs have already been done, but we tackle different angles and things of that sort. August is the beginning of the 8th year of this program. So we were hoping to have it outside, maybe the library, but we'll probably still have it on Zoom. So we ask that you join us. Please tell your friends about it. And we do record these. So even if you can't come, you can go on to the library YouTube channel and see previous recordings. And we hope you do, because the more you educate yourself, the more you learn and hopefully can change the way things are done. I mean, as Claire said, 500 million acres, that's a lot, but the land that has been given to Indigenous people is being poisoned. So the little land that's been able to be kept is one of the first areas that gets polluted. So what does that tell you?
Right.
Not a good system.
Not at all. Well, thank you again. And Patty, anything else to close out for tonight?
Just August 31st will be the date of our next program.
And 7 p.m. So join us, come to the library. If not the Red Bank Library, go to your library. They're great places. Not only can you get books, you can go to programs, you can do yoga, you can do things for your mind, your body, everything, and they're totally free. So
Okay.
Thank you.
coming
Thank
to
you.
Thank you.
we really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
everyone.
Thanks so much. Thank
Okay.
you, Claire.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Claire.
Thank
Have
you,
a
And
Claire.
Have a good
Thank you.
rest
All
of
the
the
Claires.
You're
See you
welcome.
soon. Okay.
Good night,
Have a
everyone.
good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.